Hello, welcome to the class, Psychology 2314, Human Growth and Development. For this chapter, chapter 1, we're going to go over some of the basics. Please note that there is a link called Modules in Canvas that you can click on, and all these terms are available to you in these chapter 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6, etc. You'll find that the first couple of chapters I won't go over every single term for the simple fact that we'll skip through some of the terms from general psychology and focus more on the actual developmental stages. Hence, you may not find that I'm going over every single terminology that's in the modules in this video. So if so, then you don't have to stress so much on knowing every single word or key terms that's in the text and in the modules versus this video. Try to focus more on the terms that I'm going over in this video is what I'm trying to convey to you. Alright, so chapter 1, obviously the title of the class is pretty important, right? Developmental psychology. So the way I explain terminologies is that I would like for you to not focus so much on the technical definition that the textbook may give or have the lengthiest definition. In general, our brains encode information better if you have the fewest words possible in describing whatever key term that you're trying to encode and memorize for the test purposes or in general knowledge, because ideally we would like for you to have you know these terms for life or at least for many, many years to come. But the study suggests that we do discard a lot of this information as we go forward in life. As soon as the test that we take, and then you may find yourself not remembering a whole bunch of these terms and what they mean. That's okay. That's kind of a normal process of being in college or being in any kind of educational setting, so don't stress out about that too much. But the key term, developmental psychology. So psychology, as you should know from general psych, is the study of human cognition and or mental processes and the behavior thereof. Even though mental processes and behavior are two different concepts or different aspects of humanness, but do know that they are together, right? They're coalesced together because you are not going to have a lot of behaviors without any kind of thinking involved in the first place. And some of our behavior will reflect back upon why are we thinking this way, right? The way you think is going to be spawned from the way we behave sometimes. And it's cyclical, it goes on and on. So what does that mean in the sense of developmental psychology? Is that how are we behaving and thinking throughout the process of lifespan, from the time that you were conceived in prenatal developmental stages, through infancy, through early childhood, middle childhood, adolescence, then the early adulthood, middle adulthood, later adulthood, and death. So I said a lot, I know, but basically in the essence of studying, I would think of it as in behavior, thinking processes throughout the lifespan. So if you memorize terms that way, I would find that you may agree that you can retain the knowledge a lot better than having PowerPoint definition or textbook definition that is usually near a paragraph long. All right. There's some terms as to how we developed the need for developmental psychology. I'm not going to focus a whole lot on those three terminologies, but every one of these chapters is going to be designed by the three domains in how we grow and how we develop. So physical domain is one, and there we're going to measure how much are we growing physically. How is our brain in physiological sense growing? How functional is it from infancy to early childhood, from middle childhood to adolescence, etc. How tall are we getting from during the early childhood stage or the adolescent stage, or how much weight are we gaining in each of these stages? So those are the things that we're going to focus on in describing physical domain. And the other section of how we're going to see how we grow and develop would be the cognitive domain. Okay, how can we understand new concepts better? How do we learn things as we go from one stage of life to the other? So anything that has to do with our mental processes, how we think, how we grow in the way we think, the pace in which we think, those would be all part of cognitive domain. And lastly, and it's usually separated in a whole different chapter in the textbook, social domain. How do we learn? How do we grow? How do we develop? Through socializing with people that are around us. Like who? In the earlier stages of lives, parents would play a huge role. Then as you go into schooling years, your peers and or teacher may play a huge role in the way we grow and develop. And adolescence, you may have a lot of impact from your peers, especially so, right? And as you become an adult and navigate through the adulthood stages, it may be your spouse, your immediate family members, your children even. As you can tell, I have my two wonderful children in my life that kind of helped me navigate through my own life as a father. And our co-workers, our classmates, whomever that we come in contact with, that we consider our social sphere, they'll have an impact on us, and we're probably going to have a good degree of impact upon their lives as well. So these three are the domains that are important in which that we're going to talk about in each of the stages. So this chapter here just gives you a foreshadowing or preview of what or how we're going to study these different stages. Okay? Quantitative change would be things that can be actually measured, like height, weight, speed of which then we may respond to certain situations, things that are concretely measurable and be able to know how much we're growing and developing. And qualitative changes would be something that is difficult to measure or immeasurable, like your personality, right? We can describe our personality with adjectives, like I'm a kind person, or Susie is a funny child, or Johnny is a very outgoing coworker. But to what degree can we measure that? It's a lot more difficult, right? So they're describable, but not necessarily measurable as in how much of a personality we do have or don't have. So things like that would be qualitative change. Nature versus nurture, as in how do we become who we are today and who we will be. There isn't a clear-cut answer in this. It's not that we're all that we are because of our genealogy and our biological makeup, nor we are all that we are only because of our environment and our social interactions. The true answer, or more likely scenario of who we become, the persons that we are, would have a lot to do with the fact that it's a combination of nature and nurture. Then we're going to go over some aspects of growth and development called critical period. It is what it says it is. Critical period means that these are moments in which that are absolutely going to have a huge impact in how we further grow and develop, right? So in an adolescence period, the peers interaction, how we look upon how our peers are and how they think of us, how they treat us, how they behave towards us, or even talk about us. Those things are important for teenagers, adolescents. So for them, that would be a critical period in which they're finding themselves, right? And we'll talk about other aspects or different examples of critical period, like in prenatal stages, embryonic stage, to kind of highlight, sure, all these stages are important, but there are parts that are even more of essence and importance in the way we grow and develop. Ageism would describe how we look upon elderly. So let's say the group of folks in LA, late adulthood, and how we may have some biases or prejudices even against people that are older than us, right? Many of you that are taking this class are probably in your EA, early adulthood, 20 to 40 age range. So you may not really identify with what it would be like to be a mature adult, someone who is in the LA, not Los Angeles, but late adulthood. and how life is for them, and the way everyone else, starting from children to adolescents to adults, younger adults, may look upon older people and have our own predisposed thoughts, like, oh, elderly folks can't drive really well. They're poor drivers, or they walk super duper slow, or they need a walker to walk to and from places. Are these things true? I mean, anything can be true for a very small percentage of people, right? But is that the case for generally the entire sector of that age range? Probably not. We probably gained some experiences and conversations and thoughts that we have already had, and probably formulated an idea that, oh yeah, all older people are just slow moving. And that kind of thought process would be considered ageism. Kind of like racism, except against aging or someone who is older than us. And the current terminology would be like, oh, don't be a boomer, right? And that would kind of jokingly suggest that you're not up to par in how things are in the world of earlier adulthood or even in adolescence, the pop culture. Now, the next few terms that you see in chapter 1 are going to have a lot to do with how we study psychology, and that's basically an entire chapter's worth of material from general psychology, the intro to psych. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time describing these to you because I presume that you know this material from your intro to psych / general psychology class. So, but I'll do like a super brief 1-sentence description. Naturalistic observation is how we learn of how other people think and behave by just observing them in their natural state, not doing anything additional to that particular population or situation or the environment, just watching people in their natural habitat. Case study would be studying a smaller group of people, usually in a singular digit of your subjects, but going super in detail of what you're trying to learn. And a lot of these questions are going to be asked an open-ended question, like what made you do what you did? How did you feel throughout the time that you were doing XYZ action? So that's case study. Survey would be the opposite, in which you're studying a whole bunch of people. Your sample size is going to be huge, but the type of questions that you're going to ask are going to be a lot more poignant, straight to the point, and concise, because the point is to get as much result as possible from your study. And experimental method obviously has to do with just like what we've learned from 2nd, 3rd grade on, right? Have a problem, something that we're trying to solve, have a hypothesis, and throw in some actual experiment, have some variables as in cause and effect, something that is going to cause an actual effect to happen, right? And in this case, independent variable causes the action, and dependent variable are the results. So seeing that in a scientific manner so that we can ascertain what happens when we actually manipulate or create a situation to see how people would behave, right? Like if you went into an elevator, did an experiment where you tape down $100 bill inside an elevator, what would be the reaction from the people that step into that elevator, right? And you can have a comparative to a $5 bill, $10 bill, $1 bill, quarter, whatever it may be. So these are experiments in which you set the stage to see what the cause and effect will be. Lastly, correlational method would suggest that we're trying to find a relationship. Is there something to that variable A has to do with variable B? Not necessarily cause and effect. The correlational method isn't designed to see if A causes B or B causes A. It's designed to see, is there any kind of relationship between those things? So if there are more burglaries in summertime, season of summer, right? So burglary is higher. Is there a correlation between that and the temperature going up, right? Now, one wouldn't necessarily say temperature going up causes more burglary, nor would you say because there are more burglarization, more burglaries, it's causing the temperature to go up. But rather, is there a relationship with temperature and burglaries? So that's what we would study in correlational method. Longitudinal study is something that we would do in the way we study people, same group of people, and following them through many, many years of time to see how they're developing, right? So if we're talking about this class, if I somehow gotten permission to email you every year or every 2 years and see what type of field are you working in, how satisfied are you in your career, do you have a family, how would you rate your family experience? So these are questions that I would ask as a developmental psychology researcher, and I would follow along class of 2022 or 23 or 24, whatever year, down the line, how would you have changed or maintained the same as what you thought you were going to be doing from present day? So seeing the comparative data from now to future years to come and see how the growth has happened or how the development has happened in the future. Cross-sectional study would be something in which you're studying different groups of people, usually in different age groups, and we're comparing to see how they're thinking or behaving similarly or differently, right? So if we're comparing the differences between adolescents and LA, late adulthood folks, what would be the difference between the way they spend money during adolescence versus people in late adulthood? Or it could be the driving patterns, okay? How would people in adolescence drive versus people that are 60 and above? Or it could be what kind of phone that they may carry and utilize. Is it the iPhone or the Android? So there's myriads of different things that we can study at the same time, okay, studying different groups of people. And that would be the difference between the longitudinal study and cross-sectional study. Cohort effects would be looking into how would that specific group of people, cohorts, who has experienced a very unique experience together, and seeing if they behave similarly or differently to other people who has not had that experience. So for example, if you lived in Houston, Texas a few years ago, we had a weather event called Hurricane Harvey, right? It drowned out a lot of homes, killed a good bit of people, and it caused billions of dollars worth of damage. And likely that some of us might have gotten traumatized from that experience. And because of that, how would we now, years removed from hurricane event, view hurricane or tropical storms that come our way in Houston, Texas? What would that do to the way we look at weather, the way we look at housing, the way we would do evacuation planning, right? So how would we behave differently or think differently about weather events versus people that's never experienced it? Maybe some people that have moved here after Harvey and how they see weather events because they're not necessarily our cohorts in as far as Hurricane Harvey is concerned. Okay. Ethnography comes from the Greek word ethnos, culture, graphy, writing. So it's writing of different cultures, right? So as you would imagine, different cultures have different patterns of behavior and thought processes on myriads of issues, right? So if I have to generalize in a nutshell, let's say dealing with the topic of death and bereavement process, then if you compare, let's say, my original culture of Korea to US, here, or what we normally do if one of our loved ones pass, we would have a wake service pretty swiftly, right? And right after that, usually within a week, we would have a funeral service, right? And then we move on, right? We grieve, and we are perhaps depressed, we may cry and have these moments together with our family and our loved ones, but we don't remain in memorial mode for too long. It's like, let's get this over with, almost, and then move on. And supposedly life is as usual moving forward. Whereas other cultures, and again the example is my original culture, we would have a 100-day of mourning. So after the burial and the funeral, we would set a little table or some sort of a mini shrine, if you would, nothing huge, nothing extravagant, and put the picture of the deceased person, and maybe even have some incense and have some sweets or treats or whatnot as to offer up, kind of like an offering to them, to say thanks, to say that we still remember you. And as you're passing by that little shrine or memorial, we're supposed to think about that deceased person, and we memorialize them, meaning we remember them in the positive lights that we know them to be, how they impacted us while they were alive, right? And as you do this day in, day out for 100 days, the level of depression or anxiety or anger, all these type of negative spectrum of feelings may dissipate a little bit by little bit, and hopefully the goal is after 100 days of doing that, we would have grieved properly, and that bereavement process is pretty decently completed to a point where you would get to a good acceptance stage at the end of that instead of rushing through. So that's just one example, but going to different cultures and learning about how different cultures act and think differently about various different issues or how we live would be a part of ethnography. So this will conclude chapter 1, and see you later.